Mark Twain once said, "The only way for any two people to always get along is for one of them to be dead." And for some folk, even that doesn't end the trouble. It's all too true, isn't it? Conflict, folks not getting along. If there's one characteristic that could be said to mark all of human life throughout all time, it's this. Conflict in our homes, conflict in our communities, conflict in our nation, conflict in our churches, conflict in the world. Current statistics show that over half of all marriages now end in divorce, quite often with tremendous anger and bitterness. There are no statistics to calculate the number of broken families and friendships. Within the church itself, Christianity in America is marked by literally hundreds of denominations, most formed by church members who couldn't get along with one another and didn't really want to work at it, so they just went their own way. And in the world at large, historians note that over the last roughly 4,000 years of recorded history, there have been less than 300 years of world peace. People constantly at odds with one another, often with devastating results, is a source of so much pain and brokenness and loss, both close to home and far across the globe, as we all know too well. And thus, it's a key life skill is learning how to get along, how to diffuse and to heal conflict. And for exactly this reason, this is a major topic in the book of Proverbs and our topic of discussion this morning. Proverbs is filled with text related to this issue, and our reading this morning being representative of the whole, essentially expressing the point of view that we need to get a handle on conflict and resolve it, and the danger and uncontrollability if we don't do that. As just read, the beginning of an argument is like a water leak, so stop it before real trouble breaks out. Or as it reads in the New Living Translation, starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate, so stop before a dispute breaks out. Starting from this text and drawing on other passages from the book of Proverbs, I'd like to offer just some thoughts on dealing with those times when we have disagreements with those around us. 3 basic rules for avoiding and resolving conflict. Rule number 1, to thine own self be untrue. In Greek mythology, there's a legend that's told that one day the great and mighty Hercules was walking down a narrow road, and suddenly a strange-looking creature appeared very threateningly in front of him. Doing what Hercules did best, Hercules struck the creature with his club and passed on, continuing on his way. However, a little ways down the road, he was surprised to be confronted by the same creature once again, only this time it was now 3 times as large. Again, doing what he did best, Hercules struck the creature repeatedly, but each time it grew in size until eventually it completely blocked the road that he was traveling. Eventually, the goddess Athena appeared to Hercules and told him to stop this. And she said, "This monster is called strife. Let it alone, and it will soon become as small as it was at first." Now, obviously, this is a great story that can teach us a variety of lessons on this topic. However, one of the first, I believe, is that it demonstrates that often our natural, instinctive method for dealing with conflict can be very wrong, can actually be counterproductive even, That is, Hercules did what he did best, did what came naturally to him, what from his point of view made perfect sense, but it only made matters worse. He had to learn to do what was unnatural for him. And this, I believe, is the first lesson for us all to remember. Every one of us has our own natural, instinctive way of dealing with conflict, and each of these ways has its pros and its cons. The trick being to understand our own nature and then to resist and counteract its counterproductive qualities. Think of it this way. There are a handful of basic methods that people generally employ in dealing with conflict with one another in their lives. The first is what might be called the denial method, People who use this seek to avoid conflict at all costs, right? And they try to pretend like it doesn't exist. They look for the closest exit whenever an argument begins. They clam up about their feelings during any sort of conflict. They delay, they withdraw, they avoid. If you're in this group, your greatest fear in life is confrontation, right? Now, the good quality of this method is that such people don't encourage conflict. They're not looking for a fight. However, the bad side is that concurrently, many things that need to be addressed never are. As in our text this morning, the beginning of strife is like a water leak. Just think about a water leak, any water leak you've ever had in your home. Does it ever get better on its own? Does ignoring it ever fix the problem? No. That's the point. If you ignore a water leak, it always gets worse, more and more destructive. It's got to be addressed. Likewise, this first group needs to work on confronting the conflict in their life, to face it head on, not run away. Problems must be confronted. Related to this, the second basic method of dealing with conflict is what might be called the festering method. Here again, there's a certain avoidance of conflict. However, this time it's not a refusal to accept and confront problems, but rather a refusal to accept and confront them as they occur, where they occur. That is, this person never addresses any injury exactly when and where it happens. They always sort of swallow it for later indigestion, right? Once again, the good quality in such a person is they obviously don't desire conflict. However, the bad side is that they choose to work on it totally as a solo act, to internalize it, right? Such people confront the others who have hurt them, however, only in their own minds. They go over and over and over all their injuries. They think constantly about what they ought to say and should have said. They sit and they stew and they stew and they stew until they finally boil over, And it all comes out totally inappropriately, in the wrong place and the wrong time, and far more built up than it ought to have and could have been. This group, of course, needs to learn immediacy, to deal with a problem at the moment it occurs, with the person it occurs. It's like the old stereotypical, have a bad day at work, go home and kick the dog kind of thing, Well, now you got two problems instead of one, right? It doesn't help unless you deal with the problem directly. Drawing on this, then, the third method of dealing with conflict is what then could be called the explosive method. In this method, for the first time, the person doesn't avoid conflict at all. They face it head on, and that's good, right? However, here the problem is that they tend to face it a little too directly, right? That is, people in this group, they respond instantly and aggressively with whatever's first on their mind, which is never a good thought, right? As it has been said, speak immediately in anger, and you'll make the best speech you live to regret, right? Here the person needs to learn to delay response to conflict, in direct contrast to the first two types, to actually learn how to put things off a little bit, to wait and to cool down and to think. As Proverbs 15:28 says, good people think before they answer, but the wicked speak evil without ever stopping to consider. How often is this us? Finally, the fourth basic method is what then could be called the instigator method. And in this final method, the person not only doesn't avoid conflict, not only doesn't delay conflict, but oddly enough, they actually seem to enjoy it, right? That is, they go looking for it. They go looking for a fight. They often even start one if there isn't one happening, right? They thrive on conflict. Now, without going into all the psychology of why perhaps this occurs, the interesting thing to note about this group is that they, far more than the other three groups, don't tend to know that they are in this group, right? Everybody else knows it, but they don't know it, right? I mean, don't we all know people like this? They are always in a bad mood, always stirring up trouble, always starting arguments wherever they go. But of course, that's never us, right? A quick check to see if you're in this group. Ask, are you often angry? Is everybody else in the world a jerk? Right? Does it seem that everywhere you go, people are against you and giving you a hard time? Well, remember, the only true common denominator in everywhere you go is you, right? As it says in Proverbs 3:30, don't argue just to be arguing when you haven't actually been hurt, right? It's a great lesson. Basically, find something better to do with your life, If you're in this group, you have to force yourself to avoid conflict, to walk away. Now, I don't know what method out of all these you most like to use, maybe some combination of all the above, but in all, you see, this is the first step in resolving conflict. You need to understand your own natural, instinctive method of coping with strife and resist this. Strive to do the opposite, to do what is unnatural for you. One author writes, my wife and I were driving home from a family get-together one evening when suddenly we got into a major argument. Angry words were spoken, hurtful things were said. My wife suddenly announced, stop and let me out. I refuse to stay another moment in this car with you. So I pulled over to the curb and I stopped the car. My wife opened the door and stepped out, only to realize that we happened to right then be in a very rough neighborhood. She looked around for a moment and then opened the car door and got back in. Looking straight ahead, she said, first, drive me to a better neighborhood, right? With that, we both looked at each other and we burst out laughing. And we proceeded to talk through the problem that we were having and to make up. And to this day, we remember the lessons we learned that evening many years ago. That when you seek to avoid your problems rather than face them, you often wind up in a very bad neighborhood. And that often healing comes when one party is willing to admit that their method of dealing with the conflict isn't working and to try a different approach. Rule number 1 in getting along with one another, particularly when it's so tough to do so, to thine own self be untrue. Then building upon this, rule number 2, don't fan the flames. Proverbs 26, verse 20 offers this key piece of advice in our discussion today. It says, "For lack of wood, the fire goes out." In other words, where there's no fuel, there's no fire, right? Very basic. This is the second crucial thing to remember in resolving conflict, that to stop it, along with understanding and undoing our natural instincts, we also have to quit fueling the fire that's keeping the brokenness going. That is to understand that most conflict only continues because we constantly fuel it. And again, there are a lot of different ways we do this, ways we often unknowingly or unthinkingly fuel our conflicts. First we often fuel them by refusing to leave them alone, It's like, do you remember when you were a little kid? How sometimes if you hurt yourself, say you got a scab from some sore or something, how it was really hard to leave it alone, How hard not to keep picking at it, right? You'd pick at a scab, and then it would start bleeding again, and then you were back where you started, right? It never gets better. In a similar way, we often pick at the injuries between us and other people, particularly in our home life. We keep bringing up the subject. We don't let it lie. We're constantly taking little shots at one another, picking at the sore points. Proverbs 20, verse 3, "It makes you look good when you can avoid a fight. Only fools keep stirring up trouble." Related to this, secondly, we often fuel our conflicts simply through the words we speak, through not being careful enough with what we say to each other, with choosing hurtful words rather than healing words. Proverbs 15, verse 1, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Very simple. Haven't we all had those moments when just one word has meant all the difference between an argument ending or it continuing, right? How carefully are we choosing our words? Still, another way that we often fuel our conflicts is by the counsel that we seek. Again, Proverbs 26, verse 20 that I just noted, that in the contemporary English version, it reads like this: "Where there is no fuel, a fire goes out, and where there is no gossip, arguments come to an end." How about that one? Notice that the author relates the fueling of a fire, of disagreements, to gossiping about our troubles. It's been called the Protestant confessional, right? We don't go to confessional to confess our sins. We spend all our time talking to each other, confessing other people's sins, right? Gossiping. Or as some translations put it, whispering about them. Think about that. How often have we all done this? We've had an argument with someone, right? But instead of talking to them about it and working it through and trying to resolve it, we instead go to some other person, some friend, and we vent all our anger to them, right? "Do you believe what so-and-so did? Isn't it terrible? I'm so angry," right? We've all done that, right? And you know why we do it, right? It's because we know that going to this person will support us in our anger, right? We don't want to go to someone who will challenge us to get over how we're upset. We go to someone who will say, "Yeah, you're right. That's terrible. You know what? You ought to be angry. You ought to stay angry," right? We go to someone who will reinforce what we already believe, who often even will make us feel good about being upset. The point of the text being, this is totally wrong. It only fuels the fire. Such behavior only encourages and supports you in your anger. You need instead to go to get good counsel that may not tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to hear, that will put an end to the fire. If you're blaming only yourself for the problem, to hear a voice that offers a wider perspective. If you're blaming only the other person, to hear a voice that makes you look at yourself, What advice are we seeking? Good advice or comfortable advice? We often fuel our conflicts through the counsel that we seek. And fourth and most importantly, however, in all of this, we often most tend to fuel our conflicts rather than extinguish them by simply not letting go, right? Proverbs 19, verse 11. "A person's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offense." It is to our glory to overlook an offense. Such a vital component in all of this. The willingness to overlook the wrongs, to let them go, to not see them and to pass them by. How many of our problems are fueled because we just won't let go? We won't overlook what's been done in the past, A lot of times saying to ourselves, saying to others, we've let go, but we're still holding on, right? Obviously, a central issue of our faith in Jesus Christ, of forgiveness, and a key step in which we as Christians ought to behave completely differently than all others. I remember once seeing a cartoon that had a picture of a husband and wife in a marriage counselor's office, and the wife is talking, And she says, "And you wouldn't believe the rotten thing he did to me on our honeymoon, and that was only 38 years ago." Right? You know? Right? Sound familiar? You know, never letting go of the past? Do you know that the word resentment means literally to feel again? Resentment means to feel again. In other words, to keep on bringing back and experiencing that rotten feeling over and over and over again. It seems bizarre that we would do this to ourselves, to hurt ourselves in this way, to constantly make ourselves feel bad. Yet we do it all the time. How often is this our problem in life? We're like a dog with a bone. You know, we just won't let it go. We won't just let go of ancient history. In all, how are we fueling our disagreements and separation from others this day? Causing all sorts of problems and brokenness through our picking, through our words, through our deafness, through our unwillingness to ever really let go? In the relationships in our lives that are difficult, are we fueling conflict or are we diffusing it? What are we bringing to the relationship? Consider the following. Once upon a time, a little boy was hiking in the woods when he came upon a cave. Deciding to do a little exploring, he entered the cave and he called out, "Hello!" And the acoustics of the cave being such, his voice echoed back, "Hello!" Being too young to know about such things as echoes, the little boy was surprised that there was another little boy in the cave. So he called out, "Who are you?" The voice came back, "Who are you?" The little boy asked, "What's your name?" The voice answered, "What's your name?" "Answer me," said the boy. "Answer me," said the voice. Now getting a bit angry, the boy said, "I'm going to get you." The voice said, "I'm going to get you." Somewhat frightened by this response, but wanting to maintain the upper hand, the boy shouted, "I hate you." And the voice shouted, "I hate you." And with that, the boy ran home and told his mother about the mean boy in the cave. His mother, of course, being very wise and realizing that this was an echo, she said to her son, "Go back to the cave and say something nice to the boy. Say the nicest thing you can." So the boy returned to the cave. As he stood at its entrance, he tried to think of something nice to say. What's the nicest thing I can say, he thought. Should I say, "Do you want to play?" or "Do you want to be friends?" He pondered for a moment, and then it came to him. The boy stepped into the cave, and he called out, "I love you." And the voice answered back, "I love you." And with that, the little boy smiled and was very happy. It's curious how life has a way of echoing back to us whatever we offer to it. What are we bringing to the relationships in our lives, particularly the challenging ones? Are we feeding the fire or are we diffusing it? Rule number 2 in getting along with one another and avoiding and resolving conflict: don't fan the flames. And then finally, rule number 3, never wrestle with a pig. All right? Now that may seem like a kind of an odd closing rule, but it's based on a secular proverb, and it goes like this: never wrestle with a pig, because you both just wind up dirty and the pig likes it. Right? Right? The point is that some things in life are just plain a waste of time. They serve no purpose, right? They only make things lousy and dirty for you, and you'll get caught up in them if you let them set the agenda, let them decide what the game is. You instead have to set the agenda for your own life, right? And just what is the agenda that every Christian should be setting for their lives? Well, it's very simple. At its core, it is that in every situation we find ourselves, we seek God's richest blessing for all involved. This is what a Christian does, as Christ did for us. And notice the two sides to this. First, that we seek God's richest blessing, that is, we strive after the perfect goodness that God wants, not just what we want. And then secondly, that this be for all involved, not just one side or the other. It's like Jesus taught us about love in the Great Commandment, drawing on the law of Moses, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love for neighbor and self. Not one or the other, but both and. And it's holding these two in continual tension is the final real challenge of being in relationship with one another. Setting this as the agenda for our lives, not letting conflict do it, refusing, to wrestle with a pig, Now understand, it doesn't mean that the things will always work out perfectly, that we'll be able to resolve every conflict and have warm relationships with everybody we meet. The Apostle Paul tells us, he says, as much as it is within your power, try to get along with everyone. Notice the key clause he puts on there, as much as it is within your power, In other words, we need to always try as hard as we can to make things good, but also to realize that relationship by definition takes two, and sometimes, no matter how hard we try, it's just not going to work out, It's like I once heard about this couple who every day, when the husband came down for breakfast, his wife would make eggs, right? But every day, no matter what kind of eggs she made, he wanted something different. It was always wrong, right? If she made scrambled, he wanted soft-boiled. If she made soft-boiled, he wanted fried. If she made fried, he wanted hard-boiled. If she made hard-boiled, he wanted poached. On and on it went. Well, one day the wife had finally had it. She decided she was going to beat him at his game. So for breakfast that morning, she made one of every kind of egg. Right? 5 dishes were laid out. One with a scrambled egg, one with a soft-boiled egg, one with a fried egg, one with a hard-boiled egg, one with a poached egg. Right? Let him find fault with that, she said to herself. The husband came down for breakfast, took one look at the dishes, and remarked, "You poached the wrong egg." Right? Well, needless to say, he now makes his own eggs alone, right? The lesson, there's just no pleasing some people. And that is their problem. It's not yours. Don't buy into it. You're never going to win. You're just going to waste your time. Help them, but don't let them decide your life. Never wrestle with a pig, right? Don't let conflict set the agenda for your life. You do it every day. In every situation, most especially the difficult ones, seek God's richest blessing for all involved. Resolve to turn conflict into some sort of blessing. Insist on working life instead of brokenness. And no matter how things work out, you will have done your job. In closing, consider the following reflection of one woman describing an important moment in her life when conflict was turned into a blessing, a day that she set to poetry, and she writes, "A weary young mother returned from the store, lugging groceries through the kitchen door. Awaiting her arrival was her 8-year-old son, anxious to relate what his younger brother had done. While I was out playing and Dad was on a call, TJ took his crayons and he wrote on the wall. It's on the new wallpaper you just hung in the den. I told him you'd be bad at having to do it again." She let out a moan and furrowed her brow. "Where is your little brother right now?" She emptied her arms, and with a purposeful stride, she marched to his closet where he had gone to hide. She called his full name as she entered his room. He trembled with fear. He knew that meant doom, right? For the next 10 minutes, she ranted and raved about the expensive wallpaper and how much she had saved. Lamenting all the work it would take to repair, she condemned his actions and total lack of care. The more she scolded, the madder she got, finally stomping from the room, completely distraught. She headed for the den to confirm her fears. When she saw the wall, her eyes flooded with tears. The message she read pierced her soul with a dart. It said, "I love Mommy," surrounded by a heart. Well, the wallpaper remained just as she had found it, now with an empty picture frame she hung to surround it. A reminder to her, and indeed to all, before you explode, stop and read the handwriting on the wall. Conflict turned into a rich blessing for all involved. The only way for any two people to always get along is for one of them to be dead. And for some folk, even that doesn't end the arguing. With whom do you have a hard time getting along? Remember, to thine own self be untrue. Don't fan the flames, and never wrestle with a pig. The beginning of an argument is like a water leak, so stop it before the real trouble breaks out. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 408, The Gift of Love. Would you please stand?